things that America does well, for once. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today I'm taking you through some of the books that were written by American authors that I have loved so far this year. There have been a couple of them, some have been slightly more highlights than others, but I'm going to take you through all of them. First one up is All American Girl and All American Girl Ready or Not, both by Meg Cabot. This is a duology following Samantha Madison, who is about 15, 16 years old in the first book and 17 in the second book. As punishment one day for failing a German exam and drawing pictures of her classmates with celebrities that they love, her parents decide to send her to an art class in Washington, D.C., which is where she lives. She kind of has a bit of a difference of opinion with the art teacher and decides that she's going to skip out on the class the next time. When she does this, she accidentally thwarts an assassination attempt on the president, and there her life completely does a 180. She has to do loads of press drops, she has to do loads of interviews, and she starts falling for the president's son. In the second book, Sam and David, the president's son, are together. They've been together for about a year, and David invites Sam to Camp David, which is kind of like the presidential retreat. He invites her over Thanksgiving weekend, and she thinks that this means he's ready to take their relationship to the next level. The whole book then is kind of Sam questioning whether or not she's ready, how she's going to know that she's ready, how to do it safely, and how to do it on pretty much her own terms. These books were some of my favorites when I was a teenager. I absolutely adored them. I hadn't read them in maybe 10 or 11 years by the time I reread them this year, but I absolutely ate them up. I loved going back to visit Sam and her family again, figuring out all of the things that she was trying to figure out. Because at the time, there were some of the things that I was also trying to figure out as Sam was doing it. So looking back with that kind of knowledge and confidence that I have now as compared to who I was back then, whole different reading experience. Next up is a memoir, and it's Name Drop by Ross Matthews. Ross is one of the judges on RuPaul's Drag Race, and I adore him. I think Ross is one of the people that I would love to most be friends with, which is why I absolutely loved this book, because it felt like sitting in a bar with one of your friends, having a drink and just hearing about their life, listening to them telling you their story. I read this as an audiobook, and I think that was the perfect way to do it. In this, you are hearing about Ross and his adventures on television, how he got into Drag Race in the first place, and all kinds of things that happened in between, and I absolutely loved it. Now, given Ross's sexuality, you can imagine that there are some kind of not quite so enjoyable stories and chapters in his life, and I will admit that a particular one involving Barbara Walters was incredibly difficult to read. I do feel like that shaped Ross as a person and has definitely contributed to the person that he is now. The book also comes with quite a lot of cocktail recipes, food recipes. I feel like if you were having a kind of a casual dinner party with friends, it would make for the perfect inspiration book that you can pick up some ideas of recipes from, and I would absolutely love to get a copy of the physical copy of it just for that reason alone. Next is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This is the third of Emily Henry's books that I've read, and I absolutely loved all three of them. I don't know where this falls in the ranking of my favorite books, which necessarily means that I'm going to have to go back and reread all three so that I can figure it out. Oh no. This book follows Nora and Charlie, who are working as agents or editors in two separate literary houses. And Nora has previously given a manuscript to Charlie, but he turned it down, so she's now working on it herself. She and her sister go away to a small town in North Carolina, which was the inspiration for a series that both of them really love. And while she's there, she bumps into Charlie in a coffee shop. It turns out this is the small town where Charlie grew up. He's back visiting family. He's trying to sort out some affairs that have been happening in the town. And Nora and Charlie don't necessarily hit it off. They have met previously in the past, have got a little bit of bad blood with each other, and this is really only starting to heighten that. This book gave me severe Nora Ephron vibes. So if Nora Ephron films are anything that you love, you are going to absolutely adore this. If you love reading books, you are going to really like this. If you like a book with a good sibling dynamic, you're going to really love the relationship here between Nora and her sister. I also thought that of the Emily Henry books that I have read before, this one was the steamiest. So if you're kind of looking for that vibe, this is the book for you. Next up is absolutely in one of my top 10 books this year. That is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. I know that this is not Ashley's first book ever, but it is her first adult contemporary romance, and I absolutely adored it. I'm probably going to go back and see what her YA offerings have been like, but I know that she has got a second book coming in this series about Delilah's stepsister Astrid, and I'm really excited to read that one. This book follows Delilah, who is living in New York. She's left her small town home about 10 years before the novel starts. She's working as a professional photographer, but given that it's New York, she's not exactly living her financial dream. Things are a little bit difficult for her, so when her stepsister Astrid tells her that she's getting married and has hired Delilah as the photographer for the wedding, she's not really in a position to turn down how much money is being offered. Delilah goes back home to her small town, and while she is there, not only is she involved in quite a lot of like the wedding prep and seeing all of her family again and bringing all of those feelings back up that she had from when she was younger, but she also bumps into Claire. Claire is one of Astrid's best friends. She's one of Astrid's bridesmaids. And there was something between Claire and Astrid when they were younger, but now that they have grown and that they're reconnecting, you can definitely see the sparks flying again. There is so much representation in this book that I utterly adored. There is single parent representation, there's a toxic relationship, there is lesbian representation, bi representation. There's so much covered in this book. And I also really love to see a really healthy co-parenting relationship when the partners aren't together anymore. Claire is a single mother to her 11-year-old daughter, Ruby. Ruby's father, Jack, is somewhat still in the picture, but Claire and Jack have a relatively healthy relationship. Of course, they do blow up at each other now and then, but overall, it's a relatively strong relationship between the two of them. Given how this book has ended, I am beyond ready to see what's going to happen with Astrid. Next up is Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This is the first of Rachel Lynn Solomon's books that I've read, despite having a copy of the X-Talk right behind me ready to go. This book follows Ari and Russell, who are working together in a kind of a local television station. Ari is the weather girl and Russell is working in the sports department as a sports reporter. And they're noticing that their two bosses, who had previously been married, are now divorced and are in such a tumultuous relationship that the tension between those two people is so strong and so awkward that it's actually making the workplace a difficult place to be. Ari and Russell, at a Christmas party, decide to kind of work together and bring about a Parent Trap-esque plan to bring their bosses back together. I absolutely loved that kind of hijinks. The Parent Trap is probably one of my favourite films from my childhood, so seeing it played out on the pages of this book was so good. While Ari and Russell are trying to bring Torrance and Seth back together, they are also starting to get a lot closer together themselves. Ari and Russell is one of my favourite couples from the books that I've read this year. There's some Jewish representation in here, there is some plus size representation in here, and you can tell that these two are a little bit anxious and a little bit concerned about falling into a new relationship, but I utterly loved the kind of slow burn that they had between the two of them. I will also say that I didn't go into this book expecting there to be so much steam. I didn't expect there to be any kind of explicit sex scenes, but when one arrived about 60% of the way into the book, boy was I ready to see that. I didn't exactly love one of the things right at the ending in the epilogue, but if we put all of that aside, this was such a highlight from my year. Next up is The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren. Christina Lauren is one of my favourite writing duos at the moment, and I feel like everything that they touch turns to gold for me, and this was absolutely no exception. Jess is a single mother. She has a young daughter called Juno, who I think is about 7 or 8 years old, but Jess is starting to look into going back into the dating scene, and so downloads an app where you are matched with somebody based on how compatible your DNA is. Her friend Fizzy downloads this app for her and is kind of using this as somewhat of an inspiration for Fizzy's next book. Side note, I adored that Fizzy was a romance novelist. Loved that part of this book. Jess downloads the app and notices that she has a platinum level match with somebody else on there. That somebody else turns out to be Riva, who was one of the founders of the app. To kind of drum up a little bit of notoriety for the app and a little bit of marketing, Riva and Jess decide to fake date, make it so that it seems like they were brought together by fate, aka the app, and that their relationship is stronger than ever and that they are probably going to end up making it long term. Of course, as with most fake dating books, real feelings do start to come into play. Not only is that addressed in this book, but there's also quite a lot of deeper issues that are addressed here. There is a kind of side plot involving Jess and her mother and how much of a tumultuous relationship and difficult relationship they would have had together. Jess's grandparents are very involved in this book, and when things kind of start to go wrong for her grandparents, you see just how much of an impact they make on Jess's life and on her family. And I really loved to see the kind of balance of a great family relationship with a not so great family relationship put into the pages of this book. I really enjoyed this, and I know that Christina Lauren have got a new book come out this year. When I finished that book, I immediately, just off the back of that, went in to buy the next one. Next up is Love and Other Disasters by Anita Kelly. I believe this is their complete debut novel, and I absolutely adored the level of representation in here. You've got lesbian characters, you have got pansexual characters, you have got a transgender character, you've got non-binary character. There was so much in here, but it never felt like any of them were just in there to be shoehorned in. Dahlia is coming out of a divorce and really wants to kind of strike out for herself, make a name for herself. So she signs up to a cooking show right across the country in LA. London, who comes from Tennessee, is on this same cooking show and is its first ever non-binary competitor. Dahlia and London seem to have this really great relationship on screen, but this also translates to a great and very steamy relationship off screen. I really loved watching their relationship develop. I really loved watching their relationship grow. But I will say that I was a little bit taken out of the story by the actual cooking show itself. There were a couple of times that I didn't necessarily know what was happening. I didn't know who was in which elimination, why they were being eliminated in the first place, what they were cooking, what for. I feel like if that had been stretched out a little bit more, maybe I would have been completely on board with this. But for the romance aspect of it, I was such a big fan. The final book that I'm going to talk about is actually the one on this list that I read the most recently, and that is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Taylor Jenkins Reid can do no wrong, and that is my humble opinion. This book follows the Riva children and a party that they are hosting at the eldest daughter Nina's house on an August evening in their hometown of Malibu. There are also kind of flashbacks throughout this book of the relationship between their parents, Mick and June, how much of a tumultuous relationship that they would have had, their startups, the finishes, everything in between. I loved this. It's full of chaotic drama. You also have some kind of snippets into other characters that they know throughout their lives, such as relationships, exes, friends, co-workers. And I really loved that at the end, Nina kind of stood up for herself, branched it out for herself, and realizes the life that she wants to lead. Throughout the book, you know that it's leading up to a fire. You don't know how it was caused. You don't know who caused it. You don't know why it was caused. But you do know that that is probably what's going to set everything on a brand new path. And trust me, it does. I also found it really interesting that in this book, there is a mention of Carrie Soto, who has her own book coming out somewhat later this year. And knowing what I know about Carrie now from having read this book, it has sped right up on my TBR. So those are just some books by American authors that I have absolutely adored this year. What is your favorite book by an American author you've read so far? Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.